All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Rise webinar. Today we have Ema and James Roloff here to be leading us through 3 steps to building your personal brand. Part 2, if you will, to Ema's keynote at our 2024 Rise Awards Leadership Summit. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ema to introduce the webinar.
Great. Thank you, Tori. So welcome, everybody. We're excited to have you here. Obviously, I have got my counterpart with me today. He was just front row center at the conference while I was doing the keynote. So we'll be kind of going back and forth. He'll be here to help make sure that he's adding any tips or ideas of things that maybe I am glossing over as we get going today. But I'd also love to keep the chat interactive or see any questions that you guys have coming in towards us. So we've got Tori and Desiree and James here to also help keep track of that chat and any questions. So make sure that you're throwing things in there, say hello, talk with one another as we're going. I feel like webinars are always a lot more fun when they're interactive. So I think the title of this presentation of 3 steps to build your personal brand is relatively straightforward. But what we're going to be talking about today as we dive in is first, what is a personal brand? When we say that, what does it mean? And maybe James and I will go a little back and forth on this because we have mixed feelings about this term and how loaded the term of personal brand is and kind of what it means to us and how we talk about this with our clients. Then we're going to look at the 3 steps to build that personal brand or your specific, reputation before you walk into a room might be a better way of putting it. And then I'll give some tips at the tail end here on how to actually get these steps going and getting started. So when it comes to what is a personal brand, James, I'm going to kind of pick on you here because we did a TikTok live the other day and someone brought up the idea of personal brand and you were talking about how the term kind of grinds your gears. Would you mind kind of sharing a little bit of that? And then we'll get into the official definition.
Yeah, for sure. So a quick 2 introduction as well. So I'm James Roloff. So if you don't know me, I'm Ema's co-founder in the world of Roloff Consulting. And my background's actually in digital marketing. So I did sales for a web development firm that we sold 2.5 years ago was when I started this business. So my background is more in digital marketing side of things, although sales related too. That kind of complements Ema's enterprise sales side of things. So when it comes to personal brand, I think people get it all confused amongst a bunch of different terms. I'm not a huge fan of the term because I think it implies more of a marketing kind of fluffy thing, when really it's a lot more about that reputation of who you are, how people see you in the world. And we'll talk about in a second, a brand promise. So when people think of you, what do they think of you doing for them, right? And what is that promise that when they think of your name, that they're going to get those results, and not even just doing a product or service, but the results in terms of what are they going to do? What are you going to deliver on for them? Are you dependable? Do you do quality work? Do you talk about these topics? That's really ultimately what a good personal brand is. So we'll dive a little deeper into what that is too.
Yeah. And so I've alluded to this idea, but it's kind of like James said, it's the promise that you're making to people if they follow you online or if they interact with content that you have, or they are planning to maybe start a working relationship with you. It's the promise of what they're going to get out of that relationship. And another way that I like to think about this is what is someone else going to say about you before you walk into a room? What are the things that are going to get someone excited to working with you? And how do you encapsulate that in the way that you show up online so that you always have this kind of hype person in the form of your LinkedIn and anything that you're creating online that can help you open doors and move forward in the world of business, or we talked about during the keynote, how do you use your LinkedIn as a strategic tool to do this work for you? So when it comes to looking at the different components of a brand or a promise, it really focuses on the identity of the brand, the values, and ultimately the actions that demonstrate those values. So a really easy example that's pretty universal that people know is Apple. And so Apple's identity is being an innovator. It's, slick designs that are easy to use and always pushing the envelope of what's next. I know that there are maybe some Android users that might feel differently about the innovator crown at this point, But again, when you look at their values, innovation, simplicity, quality, creativity, these are the things that when you see that Apple icon or you think about the brand, that you start to really kind of like, hopefully pull out in terms of your recognition of who Apple is as a company. So then when you take a look at the actions, early in their days, they were the original innovators. They came up with all of these things that completely changed the way that we all use technology through, the iPod, even things like Apple Music and iTunes, and, just completely changing the paradigm of how people listen to music, how they interact with technology. My little iPhone here, this now is like commonplace for all of us. And there's other people that have entered that space, but they were the first ones to really push home the idea of a smartphone. So all of these things, again, kind of drive towards that idea of innovation. It was simple enough for everybody to use, quality products that last a long time. So again, that's kind of what makes up Apple's identity and their brand promise. And we can do the same thing with a number of other brands. So like when you look at or you think about Amazon, typically we're thinking about easy shopping, quick delivery, good customer service, probably like nice pricing of items in comparison to other brands. And these are the things that are synonymous with Amazon. And then Toyota, we're a split household here. I drive a Toyota, James is going to Honda. But both brands have this same, mentality of being like really reliable vehicles, especially with Toyota rolling out like the Prius and, so many electric vehicles now. They're eco-friendly cars. They're safe and they're comfortable. So again, like this almost visceral, like response from an emotional standpoint when we hear these brands or we see their logos, because they've done such a nice job of building their brand that we know what their promise is supposed to be before we ever buy from them or start interacting with them as a brand. So one of the most common questions that James and I get when it comes to personal branding, and I'd love to see, certainly if you guys want to start a conversation, like it might be easier for James and I to think about our personal brand because we run our own company. So like Roloff Consulting is Ema and James Roloff. So it's nice and easy for us to say like our personal brand is intermixed with our company brand. But for a lot of people, if you're working for an organization, how do you have your own personal brand versus the company brand? And how do you differentiate between those two? And like I said, this is one of the top questions that we get. So James, I want you to kind of talk through your thought process on this and the analogy that you always use to explain it.
Yeah, so going back to the idea of what a brand is, I still think it's a promise, both for individuals as well as for companies. And the real distinction is more of just, is it for a person or is it for an organization? So if you go back to the last slide, Emma, just kind of going through that a little bit, like a company brand is much more marketing focused, right? It's kind of that collective identity of the entire organization. It's the brand, it's the logos, it's the taglines, all these things that make up a brand. It also is what the company does, right? The actual delivery of the products and services and their customer service that make up that brand identity as well. But for a person, it's much more about who you are and your authentic self and the values you hold, as well as the actions you take to live out those values in your professional life, your personal life too, but we're kind of focusing obviously on professional life and situation. So that's really the big distinction, is that your personal brand is about you. Now, going back to the other side, Emma, the way I like to frame this, and I actually had a discussion with someone this morning about this too, because it's like, do I focus on my personal brand? Do I focus on my company brand? Or probably another very, very common question we get is, if I focused on my personal brand, my company might think I'm just doing self-serving content creation. Now, all these things tend to come up pretty often as well. And I always use the analogy of a sports team. You may have heard me mention this in the past too. But think about Michael Jordan, right? Very big player, has his own brand for sure, and has his own line of,
Shoes.
shoes, clothing, everything on the sun. And I grew up in the 90s, so like definitely followed the Bulls. We're in Madison, Wisconsin, so we're pretty close to Chicago. And so he's got his own brand, but the Bulls have their own brand as well. And he was part of that team. And a good personal brand should complement a company brand and vice versa. They don't have to be the same thing. I think, if you made a Venn diagram, there should be overlapping values and overlapping things that you're delivering on. If you are in a forward-facing role for your company, you should at least have some passions that overlap with your company brand's promise too. But it isn't the same thing. They are complementary. Other people on your team should have their own personal brands out there in the market, but that should all build up to your company brand. And if you work for a great organization, that organization's brand should also help your brand as well. So that's how I like to frame it. I like analogies, makes things simple, but that's when you're thinking about your personal brand, think of you on a team, but you are your own individual athlete or star player on your team.
And one more example, James.
Yeah, so when it comes to personal brand promises, I wanted to pull one from Simon Sinek. So a lot of people know him in the business world, leadership world, and strategy. But he actually explicitly talks about what his brand is, and his promise really is inspiring action through powerful ideas. He's kind of a fluffy dude, but I actually like his content, and it truthfully is like he talks about powerful ideas that help people, inspire them to take action in strategy and in leadership. So he will explicitly say that's his brand promise. And unlike Apple or Toyota or Amazon, we talked about the logos and stuff, he has his own brand feel. And this is where I think it's kind of messed up with the personal branding world, that people think when they need to build their personal brand, they need to go out and like build a bunch of pretty stuff in Canva, and that's their personal brand. Like, yes, your colors and your images is part of it, but really it's much more a cohesive kind of way to deliver on that promise. So I wanted to share Simon Sinek here and to show examples of his, 3 circles, how he has LinkedIn set up, just so you can understand how that personal brand promise comes out visually as well as in the actions he takes as an author and as a leader.
So one thing, I did see a question come in and I lost the panel, so I'm just going to talk instead of trying to open it. But it was a question about like kind of having different brands associated with maybe like a side project in a company or 2 companies that you're working with. And does that get confusing for people? I think where you maybe want to focus, especially when it comes to like company brand versus personal brand, is looking for those commonalities that James brought up. So like if you have a Venn diagram, maybe that Venn diagram has 3 circles instead of 2 because you've got multiple things that you want to talk about, but finding where those qualities or those values are that are shared and finding a way to talk about those values and qualities in a way that allows you to demonstrate expertise and trust and all the things that we're going to get into here in a second across those different entities or brands. So a really great example of this is like James and I obviously focus on this kind of personal branding as well as helping companies in our business at Roloff Consulting. Our business day in and day out is figuring out how to kind of digitally transform the sales and marketing process for individuals and companies. And but then I also used to do enterprise tech sales, and I'm incredibly passionate about the power that technology has. And most of my speaking actually has to do with that. So I look at where there are crossover points, I look at where those values come together, and then I do create content that speaks to both of those. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you see me talking about this kind of stuff, but you also see me talking about change management and how big of a difference it makes. And those ideas in my mind come together, and I have an idea of how those values build on one another. But I think the biggest thing is going to be looking at where you have those commonalities in that Venn diagram and seeing how you can build your content and your brand around those pieces that are similar rather than different. So just to kind of get into a little bit of why personal branding matters and a little bit more of maybe some of the pieces that are associated with like selling, but I think also for anybody in the audience that doesn't feel like they're in an outward facing sales role, these things still apply to you in your role in helping represent your company, but then also some of these other things in terms of how you find a job, how you show up professionally, and a lot of the stuff that I talked about during the keynote initially. So, when it comes to building your personal brand, the biggest benefit that comes from it is people get to know you. And it builds trust. So 77% of consumers prefer to make a purchase from a company where their executives are active on social media. And then when you take a look at like pulling back that the layers there, that means that like as an individual, people are going to trust you more as a person if they feel like they know you and they've gotten a taste of what you bring to the table and your brand promise before they've ever picked up the phone to talk to you or exchanged emails or agreed to a cup of coffee, whatever that might be. And when you look at like sales opportunities, people with a like strong personal brand attract up to 15 times more opportunities. And this is where I feel like this kind of goes across like both job components as well as like sales or business growth components. So we've run an online community called the Catalyst community, and I would say it's mixed of a couple of different kind of like personas of people that are a part of the community. One of those personas is people that want to build their personal brand so that they never have to apply to another job, because they want opportunities to come to them the same way that then some of the people that are looking to grow a business or like their sales career are looking for sales opportunities to come into them. So it's a really great way, again, to just think about your personal brand. If it's built intentionally, is a way for you to bring the right type of opportunities, whatever those kind of opportunities are, forward to you as an individual. And then this kind of goes to that reputation piece that I was talking about a little bit. But your personal brand gives you the opportunity to shape exactly what the narrative around you as an individual is. It gives you the opportunity to show people exactly what value you can bring to a job role, to the relationship from a business perspective. And it allows you, again, to proactively take control of how you are perceived online and what people know about you. So whether you like it or not, every single person on this call has a personal brand. People associate something with you. Now, that personal brand might be going to your page and seeing that like you don't have a cover photo, you don't post content, and that gives people their own perception of what's going on. Or it might be made up of what other people have said about you, or, you know, all of those different things. You have a brand. Taking control of it through social media gives you the ability to control what that brand says about you. And then again, from like a personal versus company company brand perspective, your brand is an asset that you own. You can take that personal brand with you, especially when it's rooted in values and your ideals of the way that you approach the world and business relationships. You take that brand with you wherever you go. So spending time investing in it isn't spending time investing in the company's outcomes, even though hopefully, like James said, from like Michael Jordan and the Bulls, there's like this benefit that comes from both ends. It's something that you get to take with you that is building your professional portfolio as you go. James, is there anything you wanted to add there before I kind of move on to the 3 steps of building the brand?
No, I think it's really important to like drill this part home though. You know, if you are in sales or if you are a business leader, your personal brand, it's your network, it's what people think of you. That's worth money. It's literally worth money. And when employers are going to hire people, you will get paid more money if you have a strong personal brand, because people know that does pay out. Like that pays out having someone who's got a good personal brand. So whether or not, you know, it doesn't matter if you're an outside role or inside a role, this is something that's worth investing in, both from like a financial side of things, but also a self-enjoyment and kind of direction as well.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to get into like the meat of it and focus on the 3 areas that you can start building your personal brand. So we're going to kind of dive into the idea of defining your brand, implementing it, and then living it. Like James said at the end there, like how do you show all of these values that we're talking about? And one of the other questions that I just saw came in of talking a little bit about like how much of your personal brand is defined by what you put forward into the world via social media versus like word of mouth and reputation that comes from the outside. And I think these are going to come together in that live your brand stage as we start talking a little bit more about that and where there are synergies of both the way that you show up in the world and your personal brand online. So that as a side note as well, sometimes we'll run this component of the presentation as a little bit more of a workshop, but with the larger group that we have today, it's not really realistic for us to like dig deep into all of these components for a long time because we're in this webinar setting. But at the end, I do have a QR code that you can grab these slides and kind of go through this process of building your brand with these slides side by side for you. So don't feel like you have to like furiously try to like get all of this done, because it is sometimes a little bit of like one of our community members called it a little bit of a therapy session, going through this process of figuring out exactly who you want to show up on or how you want to show up online. So the slides are going to be available for you. So kind of take in the guidance now, and then you can kind of dig in deeper at a later date when you have some time to really sit down and think about it. So that first step is defining your personal brand. And so this is, again, really thinking through what is the brand promise that you can reasonably, consistently deliver on to your customers, to your partners, to future employers. So this is, again, where I would say, typically we would say, like, get out your pen and paper and start digging in. This would be the spot where we're going to say, like, let's come back to this like reflection piece with the slides. Or if you're really speedy, doing it now as we're talking through it. But while you're going through this reflection process, there's kind of like 3 key things that we want you to think through as you're kind of defining what your brand promise is. And first, that's going to be identifying your strengths. So, like, again, what do you want to be known for? What skills or qualities do you bring to the table? And essentially, like, again, if you could walk into any room and have somebody know something about you and your strengths and what you're really good at delivering, what would that be? Then you want to make sure that as we're as you're starting to think through creating content or how you might edit your LinkedIn profile or what types of events to be going to or any of those types of things that we're going to talk about as we continue on, you want to understand who you're talking to and what your goal is. So on the sales side, we'll talk about this as like a persona or an ideal customer persona or ICP. But it also, when it comes to things like being able to find a job or being able to leave a legacy, is another big one that we have some members that are focused on. They have to think about who their audience is too. So is your audience recruiters in a specific portion of the insurance industry? Is your audience an ideal buyer for your product? Is your audience people that are just starting out as actuaries and need guidance to figure out how to build their career? Figure out who your audience is and who you're trying to serve, and then think about like what kind of information from an educational perspective they're going to need from you that's going to offer the most amount of value to them. And then this is where it gets maybe a little bit like a layer deeper, is really diving into like defining your unique abilities. So what sets you apart from other people? How are you taking a different approach or thinking through problems differently than other people might be? How does your life experience help influence your perspective on the industry or the problem that you're helping people try to solve? And once you start to kind of like document these 3 different things, then we're going to move into this idea of like actually crafting out your brand promise, which for those of you who are a part of the Rise Summit are going to recognize some of these questions that I kind of challenged you with during that as well. But before I pop forward to the next slide, James, is there anything that you want to add here in terms of these questions and this self-reflection?
Yeah, for sure. So I think unique ability and strengths sound very similar. But what I'll say for unique ability, there's 2 like prompts I like to think of there. One is like, what are the things that you do that you absolutely love doing that maybe other people don't, enjoy? Like, what are the things that you could just do all day long that tie into how you deliver and serve your audience? The other one I think is actually even more valuable are like, what are the challenges that you've overcome in your life? Like, what are those big things that typically are negative that you had to overcome as an individual that have taught you really valuable skills and valuable lessons that you now apply in your life going forward? A lot of times, some of our best attributes are built in very challenging times and very challenging situations. So I like to look at it that way, and kind of thinking through a good example of mine is like I struggled with stress and anxiety for a long time in my life and overcoming fear of doing things. And one of my best things I'm able to do now is help people take action and kind of teach people it's okay, take the jump, take the leap, try something new. And that's something that came out of my past experiences. So that's a unique strength of mine is kind of helping people go through that process. So think about that in your life, what those challenges are that you really struggled with that you can then apply as part of that brand promise.
And I mean, for anybody, again, that was a part of the presentation at Rise, I talked a lot about like my people-pleasing tendencies and the way that I struggled a little bit with confidence because I was so focused on trying to please other people all the time. Now, my personal brand was a way for me to unlock that confidence, which I talked a lot about during the presentation. But now I have the opportunity, as understanding what that process of overcoming that looked like and building that out, that like one of the things that I think I'm really good at is being other people's biggest cheerleaders until they're able to be their own. And so similar to James's thing, James's process there is like thinking through where you've overcome things that you can help guide other people through because you've been there and you've done that. So coming back to this idea, and I'm actually just going to build it right now, to creating your brand promise is thinking through the questions that I had as a part of the presentation during the keynote. And it's your brand promise should help people understand, what do you do, who do you do it for, and how do you do it? And so James, I'm going to have you, because this is, oh no, this one's mine. Never mind. I have other slides that are focused on James, but I'm going to take you through a little bit of mine and my brand promise. And this is obviously more than one sentence or a couple of sentences, which you're going to want to distill it down to. But what do? I share strategies for companies and individuals to take a people-driven approach to digital transformation. Now, like I mentioned to all of you before, I have like a couple of different categories of where all this comes together. But to me, transformation is like the point where it all comes together. So whether that's making a transformation on sales and marketing side or implementing technology, I focus on those areas and how do we take a people-driven approach to it. Who do I do it for? I help people that are looking to successfully navigate the future of work. So whether that's taking your company and figuring out how to sell more effectively in the way that people want to buy, building your personal brand so that you become like the top candidate for somebody to want to hire, or during some of my change management presentations and stuff like that, kind of going back to my old ways of working and helping talk a little bit more specifically about technology. And how do I do it? I do it through educational content, including newsletters, webinars like this, one-on-one coaching, our Catalyst community program, courses, keynote speaking. So I have all of these different things of how I do that. So then kind of bringing down to create my brand promise, I help individuals and companies successfully navigate digital transformation of all shapes and sizes. And that's kind of what I want. I think my brand promise, based off of how I show up on TikTok, also has something to, or on LinkedIn and TikTok, there's probably some video components or like a little bit of my sense of humor that hopefully precedes me as I enter the room. But I think overarchingly over the last number of years, I have been able to make Ema Roloff and digital transformation kind of like synonymous with one another so that before I enter a room, people know what to expect. Okay, James, do you want me here? I'll go back here and let you talk for a second if you've got stuff you want to add.
No, I the only thing I was add here is that this is where you can conflate your company brand versus your personal brand, right? And so thinking about what your company does, who your company's audience is, and what they, how they do it, it's important to think about that because that's the work that you're doing. This is where that overlaps, but you should be able to find synergies in your personal brand and your company brand here. So maybe write down, if you're struggling with what you do, write down what your company does, and then think how you as an individual bring value to that process, and then kind of shift it for that perspective. So talking about your value in the process for how your company delivers. So that's one kind of quick note I want to make there.
There's another question that came in. Malaya asked the question of like, so she is also a part of a husband and wife duo and her partner has like a very big personality and like a very strong brand. And I would say like, she asked how James and I kind of manage this, if it's like trying to match the volume and intensity of that or kind of complementing it, or how do you do that? I don't think if it's not natural for you to match the intensity of that, and this goes to like coworkers and colleagues as well, or other people that are out there building a brand that you admire. I think it's really important, and we'll get into this as we're talking a little bit further, but it's really important for your brand to, and actually Mike brought this up in another comment, be authentic and be who you are. James and I are not the same people. We don't operate the same way. And that changes our dynamic a lot in terms of like how we show up online. So like James is not probably ever, unless I'm forcing him and he is like playing a grumpy character, he's not really ever gonna like show up in one of my TikToks because that's not his sense of humor. He's got a very different sense of humor. Arguably, people think he's a lot funnier in real life. But like, you see the smirk, he's like, yeah, arguably I am funnier, but he shows up differently online and in a way that's authentic to him. He's better at writing than I am. He has a really, I don't know if anybody saw the Sell with Social logo on the Michael Jordan thing, but he's got a really successful, valuable newsletter that when I look at it and I read it, I'm like, whew, that sounds exhausting to write that. I show up on video, I have a very different vibe. So do what feels right to you and what feels authentic for you for showing up. Because again, the whole idea here is for your brand to speak about who you are and help set the expectation of what it's going to be like to work with you so that you attract the right people to you as an individual. Okay. So now we're going to talk about implementing your brand. And I think that this is that was a nice segue to kind of dive into some of this. So this is like letting people know what your personal brand is, what your promise is, and how do you show up in the world. So, I mean, every single one of us on this call has probably been a part of a networking event where somebody asks you the question of like, so like, what do you do? Or like, who do you work for? And then we have to talk through this like elevator pitch idea. And even if you're not in sales, you still need to have some sort of like statement that you use to tell people who you are and what you do. And this is your opportunity to share your elevator pitch. So, that, you know, when we take a look at, and this is James, where I have your example as opposed to mine. So I'm going to hand it over to you to talk through this a little bit more. But creating your elevator pitch, you're going to state the problem that you help people solve, explain what the solution is, and then describe the impact of that. And I think for people in the insurance industry specifically, I think sometimes this elevator pitch idea or explaining what we do feels like this giant mountain and like super intimidating. So kind of like distilling it down to, again, like, what is your brand promise? And like, who are you as an individual and what do you help people do is a nice way to kind of like flip this idea of an elevator pitch upside down and maybe make it less intimidating to kind of attack. So James, I have your example here of like your problem, the plan that you help or like how you help people. So I'm just going to bring this up and have you kind of talk through it.
Yeah, so like Emma said, it's taking that brand promise and then putting a more direct, actionable take on it, and that's the elevator pitch. And if you're not in a role where it makes sense to pitch necessarily, you can just build your personal brand and the content on social, on websites, and all this stuff more directly on your brand promise itself. But again, in my case, in an outward facing role, I address it as problem, plan, or solution, and then the impact it creates. So the problem that I address is that traditional sales and marketing tactics are less effective in the digital age. So the plan is that we empower business leaders by teaching them digital strategies. The impact is so they can expand their reach, build authority, and generate more revenue. So it's a really clear problem, plan, impact, and then we'll see here in a second how I implement that across my social. So just quick obvious spot, headline on LinkedIn, right? So I start by saying the world we work in, which is digital sales. Then I talk about teaching leaders how to sell a social to expand reach, build authority, and generate more revenue. So I implement some of those features right there across the top. So right away, when someone, thanks for annotating that, appreciate that. So people can see right away how we do that. And if I'm going to keep going, I think I have more examples throughout my profile. And the same holds true across other parts of our collateral as well. In my bio section, I dive a little bit deeper and address that in a different way. So I start by saying it's time to digitally transform. And then I talk about why the old school tactics are no longer working. I talk about how we help people learn the new methods. And I talk about the impact that's going to create, and then have a call to action below that too. So it's kind of combining all these different things. Again, there's annotation on the screen there, but it's all right.
Oh, it's still there.
Yeah, like a big green blob on the
I'll
bio.
delete it. Sorry.
Yeah. But same thing on my website, any kind of speaking bios that we're doing, same thing implementing your personal brand wherever it makes sense. Again, this is where I was saying a lot of people think of personal brand, they start doing fancy stuff in Canva. It's much more about the message, and then you kind of work backwards to the visuals and how to implement that. But the goal is that anytime someone sees your content, they know it's you, right? And so here's an example of me getting more personal with some things. And that's really ultimately the goal, right? Is when people think of you, they have innate trust in your ability to deliver on whatever that promise is that you've laid out. They'll see you as an authoritative figure, and then they like you, and they want to work with you, and they know you as a person. This is a game changer, and this is where the asset of your personal brand comes into place. So if you're selling something, that's going to help you win more deals, help you get more opportunities. If you're internal in an organization, it'll help you build up more authority within your industry. And then if you're looking for new jobs, it'll help you find new jobs. I mean, the asset itself is endless, but the goal again is to get people to know you and like your brand and the brand promise that you are trying to deliver for them.
And while I'm annotating, I just want to drive home the fact that James also shared little bits and pieces of himself in terms of like his love for red wine, as in the video or in the picture there. But like, again, little bits and pieces. He's not giving away all the information about like our family or our kids or anything along those lines. He's just helping people understand who he is as a person, and it makes him relatable from that standpoint. And I wanted to show that I could do the annotation with actually remembering to delete it. All of you are getting an insight of what it's like to work husband and wife duo here. This is James's favorite slide coming up here. He put this in. He's very proud of the monkey picture that he has here. But this is going back a little bit of what I said in terms of like, how do you show up on social media when maybe like a coworker or other people in your industry or co-founder, partner, whatever it is, has a big brand and a big personality. Your brand is a reflection of you and exactly who you are. And the goal is so that when you show up online, you've created this brand promise and this personal brand for people to reflect on, that when you meet them, you want the desired outcome to be like, I feel like I already know you, because you've given them enough of who you are and what it's like to work with you, that they feel like they're stepping into an established relationship that they trust and they know. So, think about this monkey picture.
Yeah, I was going to say the intention behind the monkey picture and the slide here was that as part of implementing your personal brand, you need to be able to look yourself in the mirror, or if you're a monkey, look your monkey self in the mirror and believe in the brand promise that you are trying to deliver on. And this is where I think Mike had the comment earlier about being authentic. Like, your brand needs to be authentic, which means like you need to be able to look yourself in the mirror, like, oh yeah, that's me. That brand promise is what I do. Because that's, updating your LinkedIn profile is not going to change the world, but actually living out and taking actions on those things, and then creating the content, having the conversations, serving your customers, serving your internal team in the way that you want to, that is what actually drives the change. So we talk about the fluffy stuff of messaging and like how that works, but the messaging has to actually lead to delivery too. So take your monkey self, look in the mirror, make sure that you're good about your brand promise.
And this is where it comes to this idea of living your brand promise. And one last thing to kind of add to the idea of the monkey picture here is showing up as somebody that you aren't is going to be exhausting, and you're not going to be able to stay up and stay consistent with it. And when you have a personal brand that speaks to who you are and your beliefs and things that you're passionate about, it becomes a lot easier to create that content and drive value for people. And so that's one thing to kind of keep in mind, is that like, if you've tried this before and you're trying to put on the hat of like a LinkedIn professional to show up, like I did that, I tried that 10 years ago when I first started sales, to like social sell and connect with people and ask them to join my professional network and like try to sound like someone I wasn't and do things in a way that I wasn't authentic to me. And it was exhausting, and I gave up and it didn't work. So when you take a look at like actually having your social media be a tool that helps you accomplish your goals, it has to reflect you authentically, or you're going to get burnt out by trying to be someone that you're not. So again, living your brand promise, this is a little bit of that question that we got earlier of like, how much of your brand promise has to do with how you show up online versus how you show up in the world. And living your brand promise is much more than just creating content online. It's how you show up and deliver this promise in all of the things that you do. So again, I'm tooting James's horn here with all of these slides, but like it's looking at, okay, how do you show up if you're giving a presentation? Are you offering the same kind of value that you do behind the scenes, like while you're creating content? You can show up in person, you can show up with video, as you can see here, you can collaborate with other people, you can use images, you can use text posts, you use referrals and relationships that you've built before to speak the value of what you are demonstrating through all of your online content. And all of these things come together to allow you to really live your promise. And one of the things that James and I talk a lot about is this idea of being someone's favorite teacher and helping them see the value that you bring through all of the different content that you have, in-person relation or interactions with you, what people are saying about you before you enter the room. All of these things come together. And if you think about being someone's favorite teacher in the way that you're creating your content and the way that you're showing up and serving that ideal audience, one, it's going to make you more memorable because you're consistently offering value to people. But two, it gives you a really nice, easy framework to step into teaching people and offering that value, as opposed to, again, trying to like position yourself as like a professional on LinkedIn and try to show up as someone that you're not. You can demonstrate so much value by thinking about yourself as that favorite teacher. So my subject is digital transformation. James, like what, like, I know I have an idea of what I think your subject is, but like in your mind, what is your subject that you teach on?
It's digital strategy, right? It's helping people with digital strategy, getting comfortable with it.
Yeah. And so I would hope that, like, again, after you've had time to kind of like move through this personal branding activity and really think through like all of those components that we talked about earlier in the presentation, that you're going to be able to dive into kind of thinking about like, oh, okay, what is my, like, what subject do I teach? Again, like kind of going back to our community, we have people that are teaching their audience about nuclear verdicts. We have people that are teaching their audience about efficiencies in the broker and agency world. We have people that are focused on virtual inspections and the value of that. And they have their subject is oftentimes tied to what they do, but it's so much more than that. And like talking through all of the nuances of their subject has a ton of content. And if you break it into these mini lessons that are offering value, it allows you to build that trust and that authority the same way that like your favorite kindergarten teacher did. I know, James, that this is something that you love to talk about, so I'm going to hand it over to you to add some additional context here.
No, and again, I'm an analogy guy, but for the reason we talk about favorite teacher is just because everyone has that favorite teacher. It's like, oh, who's your, if you ask yourself, like, do you have a favorite teacher back from high school or a favorite teacher from college? Like, you could probably name 2 or 3 teachers that you just love going to their class. Like, it might even be a harder class. Like, for me, it was advanced bio. Like, I love that teacher because he was so passionate about what he was teaching. He engaged the students in the right way. He met them on their level. They were good listeners as well as good teachers. So I just think from like a personal branding and content creation side of things, just putting yourself in the shoes and wanting to be that favorite teacher for your audience is just a very effective and quick mindset to dive into.
And I mean, that was, I say this regularly, but I didn't know it at the time, but now back probably 10 years ago when James was trying to convince me to move from teaching and training into sales, he used this idea of like the best salespeople are teachers as like, I would say like the gateway into my sales career was this idea of like, you don't have to sell if you're educating because you're going to educate people on how to solve a problem and they're naturally going to come your direction. And the same thing comes from like demonstrating your knowledge in your field. If you are teaching people about the knowledge that you have, job opportunities will come to you because people will see the value that you bring and they'll trust that you understand and have this competency in your field that is much more impactful than a resume itself. It's this living, breathing entity that speaks to your value and what you bring to the table. Or same thing if you're focused on building a personal brand to leave a legacy and leave the industry better than you found it. Your you are teaching people about the lessons that you've learned throughout your career. So this goes across, again, kind of all of those different ideas or reasons that people might be building a personal brand in the first place. And it allows you to put yourself in that role of being an educator. There's, again, so many different ways. And this is going back to like that question of like how much of your personal brand comes from like content versus how you show up in the world, networking, collaborations, like how you make decisions, public speaking, content creation, sharing your knowledge, again, like maybe on stage at an event or just even in networking, like at one-on-one at tables at ITC, and the value that you bring to somebody and thinking of yourself as that educator throughout. All of these things come together to build your personal brand. So your personal brand is strengthened by how you show up online and how you use social media for that. But it is not the only tool that you have for how you do that and you set that expectation of who you are and how you deliver. Things like job performance, how you show up, the pride you take in the projects that you're working on, all of it comes together to help you build your personal brand. When we get to like really looking at like building your brand online and specifically using social media, I don't know how to stress this any more than like maybe like shaking my camera when I say it, but consistency is going to be the most important thing. And you don't have to show up with a different message or a different lesson every day, but you do need to show up regularly and let people know that you didn't just use ChatGPT to make an insightful post one time, and that's not actually experience or knowledge that you have. You need to show up on social media on a regular basis so people don't forget about you and that your brand is fresh in their mind. So whether that is posts or offering really insightful comments or connections that then lead to conversations and direct messages that are actually helping you. And you should be focusing on this on like a daily basis to stay consistent. Again, you don't need to be creating a post every day, but show up and interact with people and offer advice or questions or guidance or all types of value in the comments themselves. You can consider looking at doing things on a weekly or weekly is a lot for blog posts or newsletters. In my opinion, more because I don't love writing. Like, James shows up on a weekly basis with like his long form content. But in my world, maybe it's not an article, but I show up every single week with an interview. I've got another series right now that's focused on how people found their way into insurance. Those videos are posted on a weekly basis. So I'm not doing that activity every day, but thinking through the kind of things that you would enjoy creating that you could show up with on a more kind of like periodic weekly basis. And then ultimately, what are you able to do on like a longer term, like monthly basis, whether that's like showing up at in-person events, webinars, LinkedIn Lives, things again that help are like a little bit more meaty in terms of like the effort that they take for you to show up with. But these things are going to ultimately help you build that brand and consistently show your authority. James, you were smirking. It made me think you had something to add.
I'm laughing internally because when I made this slide, I was just showing examples of how I deliver in my examples. So you don't like write in. So this is how I do it.
Well, that's why I said I don't like that. That's too much for me.
This is not like a blueprint that people have to follow. This is more just saying like, this is how I do it, going back off that laundry list of different ways to deliver on your brand and get helpful content out there. This is me just saying, here's how I do it and kind of my blueprint. So
once upon a time, I did do a weekly newsletter too, but I decided that wasn't serving me authentically. One quick message just to kind of like add to the conversation here is this idea of like, again, how you show up consistently on LinkedIn, whether it's once a week, twice a week, every day. I mean, we both do about 5 times a week. We're not there on Saturdays and Sundays typically. Becoming a creator and creating your own posts automatically sets you apart from everybody else. LinkedIn specifically has like a pretty low correlation in terms of like number of users and how many people are creating. And there are more lurkers on LinkedIn than any other platform out there. The engagement is lower, the comments are lower. So that contributor spot right there is people that are actively commenting. So if you can show up even once a week with something that adds value, you immediately elevate yourself to the 1%. I know, James, you've got some more specific
Yeah,
stuff that back this up, but that was my piece on the 1%.
Yeah, so the 1% rule is actually comes from a study out of Europe that was looking at online message boards and online communities, but it actually holds true not just on message boards, but also on social media sites in general. They've kind of replicated this study across different social media sites and different online platforms. And that's it. If you take all the people out there who are engaging or on this platform, I should say, 90% of people will just look at the content. So they will go, they will view videos, they will read text, and they will just look at it. That's it. So that is 90% of people. Then you have about 9% of people who are contributors. These are people who are replying to content out there. Again, think about message boards, like replying to threads, or just engaging with posts of some type. So it could be like reactions and the occasional comments. So that's 9%. Meaning that if you simply comment on a regular basis, you'll be in the top 9% of people in the online community. We're talking about LinkedIn, but this could be any social platform. And then 1% of people regularly create new content. Again, across message boards, across social platforms, if you are at least once a week creating content, you are in the top 1% of users. So for me, this study just shows the bar is so low to be in the top 1%. So all you have to do is just create a post once a week, and you will be in the top 1% of users. And again, if you're engaging on a regular basis through comments and discussions, you'll be in the top 10%. So that's kind of the basis of it. I think just an important thing to think about in framing that, like, the bar is low. You can do this. You can be the top group if you just stay consistent with creating content.
See, I told you he had more of the details of the study. So kind of just to round out our conversation, I want to make sure we've got a couple of minutes to take any questions from people before we end our time together. But now it's time to kind of take a peek at how do we actually get started with this. So your homework is, you should have put the monkey in there again. We lost the opportunity. This is just a boring person looking in the mirror. But take the slides that I'll put up here. I'll put the QR code up here in a moment for you to scan so that you've got the slides with the questions and kind of the prompts for thinking through things. I saw that Tori responded to a comment that the whole recording will be available on the YouTube page for Rise here shortly so that you can rewatch it and listen to some of the context if you want. But do that personal reflection and really spend some time thinking through your values, your strengths, what sets you apart and your authentic self, and then spend some time crafting that brand promise and maybe updating things like your LinkedIn profile with that brand promise and reflecting some of that. And then kind of taking that step towards moving into at least the top 10%, if not the top 1%, in terms of creating content and using social media as that tool. But then ultimately, even if it stops with updating your profile or your thought process on who you are and what your personal brand is, continue to implement it and deliver that personal brand in the interactions that you have with your clients, your partners, your coworkers, whatever that is, so that you can continue to grow that reputation and ultimately get the benefits that come from it in terms of building trust and growing your authority. And really, again, like I talked about during the keynote, taking control of your career, because this is a really wonderful way for you to show up in the world and have people see you in a different light because you've taken the time to put the effort towards this personal branding journey. One last message before I put up the QR code is to remember that this isn't something that happens overnight. So if you go and you make some updates to your LinkedIn profile and you make one post, the whole world is not going to know what that brand promise is. This comes back to that idea of consistency and making sure that you're consistently showing up with that brand promise at the heart of what you're doing. And over time, 3-6 months out, you're going to start to see people interacting with you differently or people reacting differently to the way that you show up in the world. And especially from a content perspective, it does take time for you to build this up. It doesn't happen overnight. So kind of stay consistent and make a commitment to showing up with these brand values. And that's when you're going to see the value of it come to fruition, is when you've actually spent the time to kind of dig into it. So I'm going to put this up here. I don't have James on this slide. I feel bad. I should have put your little smiling face next to me, or the monkey. The QR code here will lead to a spot where you can download the slides for you to kind of have side by side with you as you're going through that personal reflection here when you've got a half an hour to sit down and dedicate some time to it. And then James and I are here. That's what we do for a living. And we genuinely mean that we love supporting people through this process. So go to our website, shoot us a contact form, or send one of us a DM on LinkedIn if you've got questions or want to talk through things. That's what we're here for, and it's what we do for a living. So we'd love to help people kind of move through this process if it would be valuable for them. So again, that QR code will lead you to being able to download the slides, and we'll kind of hang tight here for a couple of minutes. I think most of the questions that came in, we addressed live as we were going, but if there's any other questions that people have for us, throw them into the Q&A panel, and we would love to kind of dive into them. Maybe I should have saved all 6 of our questions instead of doing it throughout. Now we just have to stare at each other awkwardly for a second.
It's all right. Used to it. Yeah, any other questions, people think, things that you're unclear about for getting started, always happy to talk through that. Like Emma said, we work with a lot of people in different, roles, sales, entrepreneurs, internal executives, all those different things. And I think personal brands are valuable across the board. You don't have to be in any one particular role to benefit from building out a personal brand.
All right. Well, Tori, I'm going to leave this up for maybe another 60 seconds to make sure anybody that wanted to snag it could. Now's your final call. If you want to throw in a question into the Q&A, we're happy to address it. Otherwise, again, shoot us a message and we're happy to help how we can. Ooh, Jordan coming in right at the final warning. So how do you handle haters and trolls that may come out to criticize your personal brand? So actually this happened to me like a week ago. LinkedIn has released a new video feed that prioritizes video content, and somebody took a screenshot of it and then proceeded to call my content cringy in their post and then tagged me in it so that I could see everybody talking about how much they hate my style of content. And in that scenario, Jordan, what I did was I kind of shared what I believe the value of my approach is and what I believe is the value of my personal brand. And then I turned off notifications on it and stopped paying attention. I'm sure, again, with at least my style of content, how I show up in the world, and kind of TikTok style things and stuff that's maybe looks and feels really different than what a lot of the insurance industry does. I understand that I'm not everybody's cup of tea. And I understand that there are going to be people that don't love the way that I communicate. But because it is so authentic to me, I'm able to kind of let some of it. I mean, obviously, it bothered me a little that I was tagged in the post. Do that off. Don't tag me in the post the next time you're making fun of me. I'm a person, I have pride and whatever else. So it bothered me a little, but I said my piece and then I moved on because I feel very confident that the way that I show up with my personal brand and the way that I hold myself is really authentic to me. I think I would have a lot harder time dealing with the haters or the trolls if I didn't feel like what I was doing was true to me. Because I know that that's who I am and how I work, and the things I make, I think are funny, or the things I make, I think are adding value. And I get enough feedback that is true, that the other stuff doesn't bother me as much. But James, we talked about this a little bit on our live recently too. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, I mean, use the word haters specifically. So I think that's a good way of starting things. And this comes up especially internally too. It's not even external stuff. If you're within your organization, if you start taking initiative of doing these things, people can hate on you. And what I have found more often than not is people who are haters tend to be jealous that you're actually doing the stuff that they know you need to be doing in today's world. People don't always like to see people bettering themselves. Again, if you're a hater, if you're a hater
Haters gonna
mentality,
hate.
yeah, they don't like seeing people doing the things that they know they should be doing. So it's easier to criticize others than to be the monkey, look in the mirror and say, "Hey, I should be doing that too." So that is often what it is when it comes to haters. Like Emma said, assuming you're showing up authentic and you're delivering value, you're serving your audience through what you're doing. I typically find that it's more people that are just jealous that you're actually taking those steps. And
And that's
and
it. Oh,
we'll also say there's going to be mistakes in what you're doing. Like everyone makes mistakes, and if you're creating content and some of the stuff is not polished, but that's kind of part of the process of getting started with some of these things is taking those initial steps and learning along the way. So don't feel like you can't put something out there because it's not perfect. What you see of me and Emma is, many years into creating content and running digital strategy. So it's not like it's a good representation of what you should be doing on day one. But if you go back and look at our day one stuff, it's terrible and not very polished. But that's how we got better. Is we learned how to serve our audience by doing these things over time. So that's another part of it. But again, I just want to emphasize that it's like anything in life, right? Like people who are your peers who are jealous of what you're doing tend to be the ones that are the most critical voices. It's not people above you. It's probably people who see themselves as peers or below you who are, critiquing your actions.
the other thing to add to this, and James, you brought up a really nice point to like kind of put me back to when I worked for a company. There were people when I first started creating content that worked for the company that I did that made snide comments or would say stuff that would eventually come back to me about their thought process on like my wasting time doing this. And in those scenarios, I had to trust the process and trust that the results were going to speak for themselves. And it did. And Mike, you're right. Don't give the haters the time, because like I just, in that scenario, when it was colleagues and people, it was much easier for me because I knew the person and knew our dynamic to recognize that it was a little bit more of that like jealousy or skepticism or maybe fear that they weren't going to be able to step into like what this new world looked like. And in those scenarios, I let my results speak for themselves and bring in more sales, help me eventually find other job opportunities and all of those things. So again, kind of like pulling in like the idea that haters are going to hate, and that like if you are authentic to yourself, continue on that path and the results will come. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us again. If another question pops up while you're working through the reflection, shoot us a message, but we really appreciate everybody for joining us today, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.